Chapter 8 is called Societies as Ecosystems, the Psychology of Factions and Subgroups. And it is extremely fun development of the new psychology of intergroup relations, which is the subtitle of the book. So some of the key learnings from this chapter are literally trying to engage kind of chaos theory and environmental theories of ecosystems and how that could relate to our factional and intergroup dynamics. And in this chapter, I introduce the model of factional leadership, intergroup conflict, norms, and time, the Flint model. We wrote about that in an earlier book that no one's read, but we bring it in here, and I just find it very exciting. So the basic principle is that groups can be understood as existing within the society in the same way that other systems in the environment have living units at different levels. So we're organisms and we're alive, but our bacteria are also alive and our groups are alive. And so there's this evolutionary aspect to the way that we interrelate, where we can compete for resources, we can share resources, but all of that previous stuff on advantage and disadvantage on groups that are trying to create change and resist change occurs in that living environmental space. So I think those ideas are really fresh and exciting. What are your thoughts on this chapter, Kiara?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to kind of consider how constantly changing groups are, and that you've got those subgroups forming and then they might be resumed back into the group, or they might stay and then build up their own strong cohesive group for a while, and how that's all subject to the broader kind of systems that they're in, and whether the needs of individuals in those groups are being met, and how that those sub factions can form and shape and change over time. And I mean, time and place, obviously, as we've mentioned in previous chapters, is such a big factor. And what impacts, I guess, looking at the Abieska model, is like that awareness raising, building sympathy, generating intentions, and eliciting action kind of approach, and how that factors into like what factions become sustainable, what change becomes sustainable, what movements become sustainable, and which ones are ultimately going to fail or disappear and fade out. And I think it's really interesting to look at that approach when you look at collective action, because so often when particularly if you're going against the dominant power systems, that persistence is what's critical to not give up and just persist with it over time.
And even the idea that like one ending of groups is when they schism and form these different trajectories, and that in fact this is really common. We are sometimes conforming, but we often just diverge. It's part of group processes to diverge, to schism, to have factions.
Yes.
Cecilo?
There is another point that I think is also important in this chapter, is about the way we can try to understand the patterns within something that we call as chaotic. So you might understand the complexity as chaos, because we may have some boundaries to recognize or to understand the patterns within the chaotic. And one of two approaches introduced in this chapter is like person-centered analysis, which try to understand or to create a profile based on the compositions of so many different things. So I think this is a very important approach.
Yeah, and I like that about the book. Like, obviously, it's a feature of our lab and our kind of broad research culture, but new methods often come with new theories, and new hammers create opportunities for new nails. And so that's really an exciting part of this chapter, that we always are talking about, well, not only is this real, but how would you measure it, and what are people doing to try and measure it? So there's a lot of cutting edge research, not just from psychology, but from other fields as well. And just coming back to that point about chaos as well, like when we're talking about chaos, kind of mathematical chaos, this idea that a butterfly in one area can cause a tornado in another because of the interconnected systems, the feedback loops that can amplify as well as squash the impact of small changes. So it's, yeah, really fun, really exciting stuff.